Okay, we're back. So let's try this again. Can you hear me now? Kids, can you hear me now? I just stopped it and started a new one. Let me know if we can hear one another. Well, I can't hear you, but maybe you can hear me. Meg, let me know if you guys can hear me now. Tracy, let me know if you guys can hear me now. Anyone, just let me know if you can hear me. Yes, okay, excellent. So I'm just gonna keep going, and then I'm not sure what happened there, but anyway, it's all good. We'll start over. So welcome everybody to Waxing Wednesday. So on Waxing Wednesday, we're going to just address one little thing at a time that relates to our mixed media practice, okay? So in Open Studio, I very rarely, or once upon a time, I used to do either an encaustic day or a mixed media day before I realized that the two would talk to each other very nicely. So within the Two Worlds Collide program, let me grab that. Within my little book here, Two Worlds Collide, I have gone over very basics of the techniques that I learned or that I discovered for combining mixed media and encaustic very stably together. So I've put this together as a video, and very shortly it will be up on my website. It's a walkthrough in the book, so every page is then sort of walked through in a video format so that you could follow along, because it was meant to be a complement to a class, but without having the class, it's kind of hard to follow along. So anyway, so I do have a video coming, but what I'm going to do on Waxing Wednesdays is just take one little piece out of the book, and then we'll talk about that. So it's always going to be very COVID friendly, and the reason I'll call it COVID friendly on Waxing Wednesdays is because even if you don't have wax, if you're not into encaustic, you can still apply the principles, because I want to make sure that everybody can still follow along and get something out of it. So today I've decided we're going to revisit what we talked about last week, which is masks. So remember, or 2 weeks ago, we did a workshop on masks and stencils, and I'm going to show you how that relates to encaustic, okay? So it's a little trickier with encaustic, because with acrylic, we can put our paint on pretty thin and we can do all kinds of things, but anyway, we'll get to that. So what I have in front of me is this little panel that I bought, which is just like this little farmhouse panel thing that has these grooves in it. It's not that you have to use this panel. I'm just showing you that if your panel has texture like these grooves, you're going to see there's going to be a bit trickier next step to do. So I'm doing this for myself as a bit of a for those who are more advanced and don't want to use a solid surface, how you might address like the grooves and things like that. So for the rest of you, if you do have something, you can use even just a chunk of wood or something like that. Encaustic itself lends itself very well to a rigid, porous, absorbent surface. So that means that it is generally done on wood or a wood panel or something like that. Yes, there are all different types of encaustic, and I posted this morning actually different types of encaustic and different types of resin that mix in the wax and things like that, so that you can have them adhere to different surfaces. So do check out that link that I posted this morning in Open Studio with Christina in our tribe. It definitely gives you some information on that for those of you who are interested in more advanced techniques. So for today, masks and stencils. So the first thing is that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this board, which I've already pre-primed white, so that you'd be able to see some the dark. Okay, so look at, I'll explain it this way. The back of the board is very dark. The front of the board was very dark. So I painted it with a white chalk paint, and I could have used white encaustic gesso, I could have used white clay paint, I could have used white chalk paint, which I did. I could have used white milk paint. The only thing I probably wouldn't use is white acrylic paint, okay? So that's very basic. that is what mine is primed with. Then I went ahead and I glued on just a piece of paper. So I'm going to show you as my background, and I'll show you the reason. I'm going to flip this down, and I'm going to glue the piece of paper so that you'll be able to see all the steps. Let me flip this down. You guys can see the panel. Okay, so I have my paper here, and then the stencil that I've chosen to use, because remember I could do a mask or a stencil. So I've chosen a stencil, and it's going to be either this rooster or this cow. So haven't really decided yet. I may go rooster because I think he's a little more interesting. But all I want to do is make sure that the paper is big enough that it's going to cover the whole stencil. So I'm going to cut off that paper, and then up here I know that if I cut it on this side, that is going to cover. And then what I did was, just like every time, okay, I'm just going to keep checking, make sure there's no questions so far. Like every time, it's glue to glue. So a little bit of wallpaper paste mixed with my white glue. Same thing on my board. Adhere the two. And now I'm going to use my credit card or a plastic card of some kind to push out the excess glue, and I can't find anything right now, so just pretend this is what I'm using. In a pinch, you can even use a piece of cardstock or a heavy piece of cardboard or any kind of piece of plastic or something like that. Okay, now don't forget, we had those little rigid lines. I'm going to wipe off the excess. Some paper towel. So don't forget, we had those rigid those lines, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use something that's not sharp. I don't want to use a blade because I don't want to cut the paper. I just want to push it down into those grooves to acknowledge their existence. Later on, this will be important. Right now, you can barely see it, but it is important. There we go. Okay, so I've pushed that along the groove. So similarly, if you had some kind of a uneven substrate, like a piece of driftwood or something like that, you would want to make sure that your paper conforms to the shape. So the way we get the paper to conform to the shape is by getting it really pliable, which is with the glue, and then to get the surface absolutely fully glued up. So even the grooves, everything needs to be all grooved or glued up. And then you're going to use whatever tools necessary, or even your fingers, to just make it conform to the shape that your board is, okay? So that would be a little more advanced if you're working on driftwood or something. Did you buy your board at the dollar store? Oh, I have no idea. I just found these in the studio. All right. Okay. So, yeah, sorry, I can't tell you guys where I bought these boards because I have no idea. I do know I have about a dozen or so in the studio, so, and they're marked $3.99. So if anybody is interested, just holler at me and I'll ship them off to you. Okay, so you can see here how my rooster's going to fit on there. This one is wet, so I'm going to swap it out with the one that I did earlier so that I'd have a dry board. Okay, we really need to have a dry surface for wax. So you can never trap moisture under the wax. That's really, really, really important. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my stencil as a like I'm going to use the rooster as the pattern. So I don't want to cover it in anything but clear wax, but because it's dark, I just want to use a very, very, very thin layer of wax. So what I'm going to do is apply the clear. Now, I don't think I can make this happen that you guys can see the wax and this, so I'm going to leave it like that. And I'll just come over with the clear wax on my brush And you're going to see that I'm starting from the outside of the stencil, and I'm just pushing the wax down, and I'm almost gluing the stencil to the board. Okay, so by forcing the wax in there, I'm gluing it to the board. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a blade, and this is just a clean razor blade, and I'm cutting the wax. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing on the stencil from the outside in, and what that's doing is it's creating an outline of the rooster for me in wax. There we go, and it's filling in the rooster a little bit, but the most important thing that it's doing is it's actually kind of, it's creating the outline, but it's also gluing my stencil down. So now I'm gonna go in and take out some of that wax. Now I can go back in with a second layer of clear and build up a bit of the volume, because now it's already been sealed. It's kind of glued to the board, which is what I was looking for, to get a nice tight seal. So I'm just using clear medium here. Stencils and wax are kind of tricky, especially if you're using, if you're not using an iron. But I find that I get the crispest, most authentic looking and clear image if I just use a little bit of heat and then a clean blade. So for those of you unfamiliar with working with razor blades, I'm pulling the wax off. I am never like obviously cutting myself, so just be careful with blades if you're unfamiliar with working with them. Always go from the side that you're holding, the safe side, out if you're pulling off wax. But the best way to clean this, because all I want to do is take off the bulk of the wax, if you're cleaning it, all I do is I put it on the side of my griddle like this, pretending this is my griddle. I put it on the side of my griddle, it melts, and then I take a paper towel and I just wipe it off. But I just don't want to waste this amount, so that's why I pull it off. So now I have a clean one here. And I'm just going to grab my heat gun. Normally I use my torch, but because this is a Mylar stencil, I'll actually melt that. So I'm just going to grab a heat gun. Pardon the noise for a moment. Oh, it would actually help if it was plugged in. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to warm up the wax, mostly in the middle. But I want that wax to go clear. And I don't want to wreck the stencil at the same time. And I don't want the wax to run underneath. So I have a few objectives here with a slow and steady warming approach. And I'm also doing the entire stencil at one time, so that I don't end up with one area that is sort of better than the other, or clearer than the other, or warmer than the other. The whole thing is getting heated up at the same time. Wax is becoming clarified. And you can see some of my stencil is lifting because I didn't push it down well enough in those areas. That's okay, I just have to pay attention when I go back to them with the blade. Okay. Now you're going to see with the blade, I don't want to go into anything that is puddly, meaning that anything that has fresh wax sitting on it needs to really be sort of addressed a bit more carefully, because when it's a puddle like that, you can't really do anything about the wax because it's just going to slide underneath. You can see on this one I'm tacking down that one section that lifted. And with my blade, I'm just cutting in to make sure that I get a nice crisp image of the rooster. And I'm using the warm wax and I'm just filling back in a little bit until it becomes too difficult. There we go. So now I'm going to lift it up And there is my waxed rooster. So there are two ways that I could have approached this. For now, I'm just going to show you. One way is that this way is a bit more challenging because you have to build up a thick layer of wax, but I could just put another color like a white wax over top and then scrape very thin, and then this rooster will come back because we've already cut the outline out and fused it in clear. But the way I'm going to approach it, just to show you guys kind of the safer way to do it, would be to approach it with a smaller brush. So let me do that after I give it just a little fuse. I don't want to overfuse at this point, but I do want to round the edges just a wee bit so that it doesn't look like I stuck it on. That's kind of like a little pro tip when you just round your edges a little bit. Okay, so now I'm using a fine brush, and I'm just going to use white or this creamy color, and I'm going to follow along the edges of this rooster using colored wax. So at this point I have a creamy colored wax that I've already made. And I'm able to follow along with a small brush. I'm going to flip this up and see if there's any questions. So if you have any questions, fire away. So this is using a mask or a stencil. So a mask would be, remember, if you guys are remembering, a mask would be the part we cut out, right? So, so that would be like the rooster itself. And then a mask is actually easier, but stencils are just something that we have more readily available. There we go. Now this is where you're going to really want afterwards some carving tools that will give you a bit of control. So we had talked about carving tools before being anything from a razor blade to a shish kebab skewer, like a bamboo skewer, all kinds of things. This you're going to want something with a teeny bit more control. So what that means would be something like a pottery tool or a dental tool, or just something that you have a bit more fine control. If your stencil is not as fussy as mine, like mine is a bit fussy with all these little feathers and shapes and everything else, it's not as easy. But some stencils that you could get, like let's say you were just doing a star or something, right? So if you did a star, then it would actually be a lot simpler in the addition of the white wax. So I'm just getting, my wax isn't very opaque, so I will have to go back in and do a second coat, but I'm not going to be as detailed with the second coat. As long as I get the first one close to it, I'm not as concerned. Okay, a little more here. So the mask, let's talk about the mask for a sec, because if you had a mask of this rooster, which is the part that would be cut out, right? You could, or if you wanted to take the simpler route, what you would do is you would take your stencil, and so I would take this stencil, I would lie it down on a piece of cardboard or something like that, and I would trace it with a pencil, and then I would cut it out. So using your X-Acto knife or something like that, then you would have the positive, right? Here we have a negative as the stencil, and then the positive would be available. And then I'll show you later on how we would use, not with the rooster, but with a different project, I'll show you how we would use a mask, which is simpler than a stencil. A stencil, it just happens to be, a lot of you have stencils in your art supplies, whether it be from mixed media or from scrapbooking or whatever the case may be. A lot of us have stencils already, and I'm just showing you one way to actually use them, and I guess two ways to actually use them if you wanted to turn it into a mask. Okay, so I think for all intents and purposes we're done. I'm going to flip this around for one quick sec, and you can't see. Okay, no good questions. Not no good questions, I mean no questions that I need to have you guys follow along with. That's good. This is good. It means everything is clear. Okay, so now I'm going to use my bigger brush. I'm going to get rid of this little piece of paper because it's not stuck very well and I don't need it. I'm going to switch to a whiter wax because I think my white wax might have a bit more pigment in it, which is actually really good because the cream color that I've been using doesn't have a lot of pigment in it. So there we go. You can see this is a lot more opaque. It's able to cover the wood fairly quickly. When I primed this board white, I primed the cord as well. Not sure I would do that again in the future because it's quite stiff. And in order for me to hang this properly, if I decide to use this cord to hang it, what I would probably do is wet the cord with water and then hang it so that it could actually hang vertically and get rid of that stiffness to it, which looks super unnatural right now. So we're getting there. So the reason I like masks a lot with both mixed media and with encaustic is that once you have your mask or your stencil cut, it's great, as I've mentioned to you guys before, it bears repeating that repetition in your artwork or shadows or reflections or what else? Reflection shadows. They're all very and repetition. They're all very good for the composition in our art, because sometimes we put an element in and we're like, okay, now what? And then sometimes we want to add something because there's an area that looks bare, or you think to yourself, oh, you know, I really want to add something there, and then we go and add something totally unrelated. And then what ends up happening is we create more composition issues. But if you just repeat the element that you had in the first place within your own art, then you actually create this very interesting little look that doesn't have competition with the initial intention of the image. So I'm just going back over some of my edges with the white where I had the cream. I'm not being all that careful, as you can see, because the main part is going to be with my carving tool. Like these feet, I kind of lost what the foot looks like. but you're gonna see in a moment how cool this is gonna be. Right now it's like, what is she doing? Okay, I'm going to fuse this. So fusing is just melting the wax so that it adheres sort of back onto itself. So we have clear wax, and then we also have this white wax. And now I'm just melting the two. I'm bringing the bridge of the two together. I don't necessarily want to make the entire thing perfectly smooth, so depending on how much you're going to fuse the wax or melt the wax is entirely up to you, but you do need to make it sweat. So what that means is that you need to get a little gloss on the surface of the wax, and that means that the surface molecules have melted enough that they start to look a little wet. If you continue to fuse, you'll turn the wax into a puddle. You'll liquefy it. I don't want to liquefy it because then I'll just blend all my little edges together that I just worked so hard to create. I do want to get rid of some of my obvious brush strokes though, because that's the one thing that drives me bananas about encaustics, is when you can see the brush stroke. That's a personal preference. Okay. There. Now I'm going to go grab my tool. I have to get a good carving tool because I don't have anything handy. Flip this up once again and see if we have any questions. The white was clay paint or white wax? No, hair dryer doesn't work to fuse. Unfortunately, it's not hot enough and it blows too much air. The last white. Okay, and then so you are sure that the last white coat, Amelia, was wax. So can I use beeswax? Candle as wax? Okay, so every question you have about encaustic and stuff like that, like I said, I did a post earlier today that talks to you about encaustic and things like that. Basically, yeah, encaustic wax is not just wax, it's also a mixture with a resin, which is going to provide different surfaces. I'm using a Damar resin, so I'm actually using an encaustic medium, not just wax. The white and the cream that I've been using is just the encaustic medium that has an additional white pigment added to it, or cream pigment added to it. But do go back to the post that I did earlier today. It was this morning sometime, and I found a really good little chart on different encaustics and how they're made and stuff like that. The reality is you can experiment with anything. I don't ever recommend, especially with encaustics, that you experiment and then sell if you're experimenting. It's only because it can become quite unstable, and that can become and that can become a problem later on. Initially it looks like, oh, this is perfectly stable, and then later on it turns out that the thing ends up falling apart in different ways depending on what type of resins and things you used. So because Amelia is watching, I'm going to, and I think Amanda's watching too, I am going to tell you guys now that both Amelia and Amanda teach like a 101. They teach encaustics, and I know that both of them are in the midst of doing online. Amelia, you can let us know where you're at with that. I'm not sure if Amanda's on yet or not. I know Amanda's recording right now, so but if Amanda's in the Ottawa area and Amelia's in the Southern Ontario area, and so they teach a lot of 101s, and that's what you really want to get into if you're into encaustic. What I teach is kind of a, can I say, half-assed version of it. I don't know. I don't know if the sensor monitors are going to go crazy or whatever. What I do is I learned purist encaustic, and it just wasn't for me. So once I learned how to apply it, and I learned the principles of it, and I learned the different variations of it, then I ended up creating my own program, which is my stable combination of, right? My two worlds collide. I came up with a stable combination for the way I like encaustic to be, which is part of mixed media. So I'm not the best person to answer your questions, only because I have to go back into my memory banks and remember what my training was and everything else. But I don't do a lot of purist encaustic anymore, so I really hope that Amelia and Amanda will let you guys know if they're hosting classes. I know a lot of classes and things are being canceled and rescheduled. But if you are at all interested in learning everything there is to know about encaustic, those are your two ladies right there, and they are watching with us every day. And yeah, I couldn't recommend a program like that more, where you're actually learning from people who work with it every day and who understand the ins and outs of it. So I'm going to flip this back down. We're going to continue working with our mask and stencils. Okay, so let me flip this down. Make sure you guys can see. There we go. Okay, so now I can lay my stencil back down on top. And if I wasn't worried about wasting white wax, because white is a bit of a hot commodity in my studio, so I could have just put the clear on where the rooster was, not even specifically, just put the clear on, fused that, and then covered the entire board in white wax, fused that. Then I could have laid the stencil on and I could have scratched away everything that wasn't a rooster. Why didn't I do that was because I didn't want to waste my white wax. So that clear wax that we have under there is what I call a barrier wax. So I've created a barrier to protect my paper, but now when I scrape the white wax off against the stencil, I'm able to keep this, and I just know it's a combination of white wax and clear wax. So I can throw it back into my little tin of white wax, so I'm not wasting. But you see how detailed I could get? I could get right in there and I can remove all this wax by the feet. And like I said, the whole body could have just been removed. But for the sake of preserving my wax, I wanted to make sure that I just did it in a more efficient way. Because you see, like, removing this is, especially in this tedious area, it's a bit more challenging. So I may not be using the best tool to be in there, because it should have something a little more with a hook on it. So I do have another tool here. I think in this case a little pottery tool would have been better to find, but I didn't grab one of those, and I'm looking around my studio. I don't see anything at arm's length, so I'll just carry on with this little carving knife. So these are carving tools I'm using, wood carving tools. I'm gonna cut against there, remove that wax. And then the other thing I'm going to do is, where you don't see the wax, meaning like up against a border that doesn't have any wax, I'm just going to go ahead and trace this afterwards with my tool anyway. And the reason I'll do that is because when I do a patina, which I'll show in a minute, it will actually pick up on those grooves and the outline of the rooster will be even more evident. So I'm just tracing along, scratching out any wax. There we go. So now I'm going to go along and I'm just going to, like I said, do a little trace. remove any wax. So, keeping in mind we always have this stencil to come back to, we'll take it off. And I'll clean up the edges with a little bit of white, because in some areas you can see that my wax I didn't even do a good job of getting some wax in there, so I'm just actually going to go back in and clean that up just a wee bit up to my carving line. So I guess one advantage of painting the whole thing white and then carving it out is that you end up with a cleaner line than having to go back in and touch it up. But I actually don't mind the sort of rustic look anyway, so I'm pretty happy with that. Especially because I'm going to do a patina on the whole thing, so you'll see it's actually going to make it look even more rustic. It's not even going to matter. Remembering, of course, also that I've dubbed myself the Queen of Good Enough, so I'm likely not to sit here and fuss with anything too long, because our brains are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tools for filling in the blanks. And so even if this is not, you know, perfectly correct rooster, our brains will fill that in and say, yep, that's a rooster, all right. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to carve those lines back in, following those grooves. So the reason I'm doing that, this one is clear, it's okay, is because I could fill those lines up with wax, but I actually think that's why I chose a rooster motif. I actually find that it's lending itself to like a bit of a farmhouse look. So you could fill them up with wax and ignore those lines, but I'm actually going to play them up a little bit because I like them. And I'm going to fuse again. This time I'm going to fuse a little more carefully. I don't want to melt everything together. I'm just rounding the edges a little bit. Okay, so now I'm just going to make up my own lines here. That's the liberty we have as artists, right, as mixed media artists especially, is that I can make this rooster now look any way I want. So I'm going to give him, you know, some of those roosters have that crow's crazy feathers. I'm just going to give him a few of those crazy feathers. There we go. Oh, and then I just had a fun idea. Alright, so fun idea number one. We'll see if this is going to work. I'm going to use something to represent a ball. And I don't have anything metal right now in front of me, so I'm just going to warm up the wax a wee bit. And I'm going to use plastic, because I have a plastic cap here. Just so I can create a circle. There we go. So now I have a little circle created, and now I'm going to use a colored wax, and I'm going to fill in that circle and have him sort of resting or balancing on this little ball. Just for a bit more interest. So I used red wax, but with a pink brush, which is why I'm getting kind of a weird combination color here. we go. So I can build that thing up as high as I want. Ideally though, I would fuse in between. So that will just help the wax adhere to the next layer. Okay, so let's do a patina on this so that you can get an idea of sort of the next step. And then we can do a little pan pastel, because I know Sophie had a question about pan pastel, so this would be a good teaching opportunity for that. So, I only ever use vegetable oil when I'm doing my patinas, and I use either the R&F oil stick, never the Cama because they're too hard, or just oil paint. So I'm just using an oil paint here. And my favorite color, hands down, is always raw umber. I also use black, and then I have colors, like fun colors just for different projects, but essentially I wouldn't be anywhere without my raw umber, my black, my white, and that's pretty much it. Now I'm gonna have a paper towel, and you ready for this? Vegetable oil. So a lot of purists will use linseed oil, and I used to use linseed oil, but then everybody has scared me, telling me that it can cause fires. And it's funny how once one person tells you about a garbage can fire, then someone knows someone who's had a garbage can fire, and all these things have happened. So I'm just now forgetting about the linseed oil, and I just use vegetable oil. And it's been so long that since I've used the linseed oil, that I don't notice a difference. So I'm actually quite happy with it. So all I'm doing is you saw the 3 or the 4 globs of oil paint I have. My paint is quite dry, so I'm using vegetable oil on my paper towel just to loosen up the oil paint to a consistency where it's going to go into the grooves. If it doesn't go in the grooves, then it's not going to do its job of being a patina, because a patina only rests in the grooves. So if it's not in the grooves, then why am I even doing it, right? So a lot of mistakes that people make when they first do this is they add way too much vegetable oil. And because what that does is it creates a beautiful little patina at first that goes lovely right down into the grooves where it's supposed to go. But then because there's so much oil, when we go to remove it, it just washes itself right out. So that will be enough for me. Now I'm going to toss that, whoops, right onto the floor. Not my intention. Now I'm going to use a clean paper towel, and I'm going to wipe off the first layer, which is mostly just stained vegetable oil. Okay, so I'm finding a clean spot on my rag, fold it over until there's really no more that's coming off with that. Then I'll find a clean spot again, waste not, want not, keep folding over your paper towel, and I'm just going to apply a little vegetable oil to the paper towel, and I'm going to start cleaning the surface. So remember, we don't want too much vegetable oil because it'll just wash the, it'll just wash the vegetable oil and the stain, the patina, right out of the grooves. So, not much left on that paper towel. So now I'm going to take one more piece of paper towel. I'm going to give it a little wipe, sort of a last wipe, making sure I don't take it out of the grooves. And then the last pass I always do is a very clean piece of paper towel with a little bit of vegetable oil on it. And then I kind of just do one last pass. The reason I'm doing that, now a dry spot, dry up any oil. The reason I do lots of passes with clean paper towel and that sort of thing is just because it takes a long time to dry otherwise. There we go. So I'm going to line that up. Apologies if it's all crazy. See if there's any questions. Nope, we're good. Okay, so now you guys can see there's a little rooster bouncing on his ball. So now I have to fuse this, right? Because I just put vegetable oil in there, and so now I've made a slick surface. This slick surface won't accept anything more very well because I've kind of sealed it off, if you will, with vegetable oil. So any pan pastel or crayons or anything else we want to do at this point won't really stick very well as long as I have this thin film of vegetable oil on here. So I'm going to fuse it in an attempt to have the wax melt just enough that it'll absorb any paper towel, any vegetable oil. And then I'll let that sit for a quick sec. Then I'm going to take my paper towel, once this is no longer warm, and I'm just going to wipe off any vegetable oil that may be sitting on the surface. If it comes out clean, you're good. So now I've got that part done. Excellent. And now pan pastel. So now I can go back in with my pan pastel and my stencils. And pan pastels or soft pastels can be worked the same way. So let me grab a soft pastel as well, because I know, oh, that's what I was supposed to do yesterday on Technique Tuesday. Sorry guys, I just remembered I said on Technique Tuesday I was going to do pan pastels for Amelia. That's next Tuesday, Amelia, I promise. So right now I'll do a bit of pan pastel and soft pastel so that you guys can see the difference. But next Tuesday, promise, we'll do it for both mediums. All right. So I could put my stencil back on top if I really wanted to, right? I could keep using this stencil and then go against it. So I'm just going to pick up a bit of pan pastel either on a makeup sponge or on a brush. I'm not going to use the stencil anymore because it's easier for me if I don't. But I could go in and I can deepen, I can clean up some of those fuzzy edges. I can, what I'm doing here is I'm kind of getting rid of a few of those polka dots. And so that's making it look less flat, which is kind of fun. You can use a lighter pan pastel, make a highlight. I've got kind of a shadowy thing going on. I can add a bit of volume to this ball. So here's one of the little tricks about pan pastel, is that when you put it on, it's just kind of sitting on the surface, right? My wax is warm because I've been working this, so it's just kind of sitting on the surface. Now the key to get it to really bond into that wax is to take a clean finger and to go in and to really burnish it into the wax. So without pushing it into that warm wax, it's just kind of sitting on the surface. So I really get in there and I really burnish it, and it kind of blends at the same time. Look at that volume on that ball. And that is what you want to do. Now the fusing is extremely important when you've got pan pastel because it's so delicate. If I go in and fuse this is the problem I think Sophie was having last week, is that she was over fusing the wax, because remember I told you that in order for wax to hold on to things, you need to fuse it. So we need to melt it to a point where it just glistens a little bit, and that means the little particles have started to dissolve and they're just going to grab on to what's on there, which is here, it's the pan pastel. So we just want it to grab on. If we were to overfuse, what happens is you liquefy your wax, and that's when it looks like it's separating because it's just liquefying again. So I would bet, Sophie, that what you were doing last week was just overfusing your wax, and that's why you were ending up with it separating and looking like it was going into individual cells. So right now I'm just scraping off some of the the patina and some of the pan pastel, just so that it doesn't look a little dirty. Some spots I don't mind a little fuse. It looks kind of cool. But if you don't want it to look fuzzy, you can just clean it up a little bit. I like this rustic look, so I'm going to leave that. So now let's go on to soft pastel. So soft pastel would be the exact same thing. You just, because they're so soft, you just pick them up with your brush or your makeup sponge, and then you apply them the same way. Oh, this brush is too dirty. Let me get a better soft pastel and see if I can find a makeup sponge handy. Everything in my studio is so dirty. Okay, look at this. Makeup sponge I can find is just filthy. So anyway, let's see what we can get out of this yellow one. Except for more yellow. There, you see that highlight? I just put that on with that, and then I would blend it in with my finger. And then that is how I would use the, see if I can pick up some blue on this one. I wanted to put a little highlight of blue kind of in the back, because I thought that would be a little fun complement towards the or against that red. So it's just a little sparkle. Now for super fun, because I'm just going to fuse this carefully. Remember, we have to fuse every layer, so including the pan pastel. And I'm just going to add a little fun. So I use a lot of gold flakes and gold leaf. I love this one by Nuvo. So I can just push it into the wax. Right? Doesn't look like much. Whew, it's flying everywhere. And now I could take my tool and very carefully I can carve away the stuff I don't want. So it's hard to get wax or gold leaf to do what you want. So typically what I do is scratch it away afterwards. There we go. So little gold leaf there, and now I'm going to come back in with my brush with the red wax on it. Just where I carved away a little bit, I'm just going to add a little bit more back on. And then super carefully fuse that. So let me turn this back up. There you are. Okay, so see the little farmhouse thing we did today with a mask? So a mask or a stencil. This is how we would create the this kind of a project. So as a standalone project, this is one technique that goes a long way. I tend to use this kind of thing within a bigger painting. So whenever I have an image or something and I want to replicate, or I want to duplicate, or I want to do the shadow, or I want to do a reflection, or I want to do like a mirrored image, this is the technique that I would use, would be masks and stencils. Okay, so I'm going to show you one more thing before we go, and that'll be how to use the mask. So I'm just going to do it quickly on, maybe that other board will be dry. Let's see if that other board's dry. I think it is. There we go. So let me just do a mask on this one using that technique that I just showed you. So masks can also be stencils, by the way. or can also be stickers, by the way. So you can get your masks in a variety of different ways. You can either make them yourself, like we did last week, or you can buy things that are already cut out. Like this is just from the dollar store, these leaves. That could be a mask. A sticker could be a mask. So I'm just going to put some stickers on here. Hopefully my paper's not too wet or it'll just be pulled up. But stickers, just think of anything that you want to cut against the shape. I often just do like random torn circles and things like that, or I'll do a square if I want to highlight something. There we go. So I'm just going to put that down, and now I'm going to take the wax and try to just go over the whole thing. To show you a different way of doing this is when, because we used a stencil, right? On the rooster we used a stencil. So now we're using a mask. So if you actually have a mask, meaning something that you've cut out, so had we taken the time to cut that rooster out from a piece of cardstock or something, then in order to secure it in place, you can spray the back with a little spray adhesive and get it to do your bidding that way. So now I'm forcing it kind of around the edges and into the grooves and all that stuff. So that was my first wax, which wasn't very opaque. And I'm gonna go back in with my white wax, which is at a premium right now for me. I think I'm gonna have to do clear because I'm totally running out of white. Not clear, sorry, the cream. And I have more cream available, but by using the white on top of that black part, I'm able to cover it a little easier. Okay, let me use the cream again. There we go. For anybody who makes their own white wax, I'll tell you, it's challenging because every time you heat up your wax, if you don't use your white over and over and over again, you risk it oxidizing every time and turning more and more yellow. So you always end up with cream. Okay, so now I'm going to lightly fuse this. Whoops. I have a little paper towel fire here. One moment while I put this out. So never fuse near your paper towel. I do this all the time. Pardon me while I stick it in my bucket of water. There we go. No harm done. Better me in my studio than in my classroom, which that has happened several times. Okay, so like I said, I'm just giving this a quick little fuse. And then while the wax is warm, I have to take those stencils out. Now, if you can't do it fast enough, then it's okay because you can always go back and retrieve them afterwards. But I'm going to try and find the edge of this one. So what I meant by that was that you could always go back in and you could warm up your wax again and then take it out. So if you can't find your edge, not to worry. I'm just guessing it's under here somewhere. There we go. So that's how you would use a mask instead of the way we did the rooster, which was the stencil. Right, so now this is still pretty warm, but I'm just gonna go back in very lightly and then fuse again so I can round those edges. Now, this is just paper back here, so what I could do is one of two things. First, I could have put clear on there first, fused it, then put the stickers down. But now I could go back in and I could put the clear or another color and then just scrape against it using my clean blade, right? Because then we would cut down to whatever color we put in there. But I'm actually just going to leave that because I think it looks kind of fun. The juxtaposition between the paper, because it's very matte against the wax, I think looks really good. So I would probably cut these lines similarly to what we did before, round them, whoops, round them, and then I'm not finding my groove at all very well. There we go. And then that's okay, I'll smooth it out. Round them with the heat gun and then do the patina the same way we did before. Awesome. If I wanted it to look a bit more distressed and that sort of thing. But I kind of like it like that, so I think I'm just going to fuse it, round the edges a bit. This totally looks for like propaganda now for eating chicken. I'll turn it up so that you guys can see. Yeah, this totally looks like they're meant to go together. Eat chicken. Okay, so I hope you guys learned a little bit about masks and stencils with wax. We can keep going over different techniques like that every Wednesday. Like I said, as a standalone project, they're just really fun to practice these things. And then you can come out with some sweet little things that are giftable or whatever you want to do with them afterwards. And alternatively, they work really well within your paintings, right? So I think that's about it. And thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll see how many people. Normally we have about 20 watching at any given time, and then by the end of the day we have like anywhere between 80 and 100 people who have watched the videos. And I'm noticing that, or I'm fearing that Trusting Thursdays, our numbers may go down at first, but I'm really hoping that Trusting Thursdays starts to bring about more people and more viewership, because I think that that is the gift in art, is the ability to shut off that left brain and let the right brain play. So that's what Trusting Thursdays is all about. And yeah, so I'm just going to be working away on a painting and kind of narrating as I go, but it's not really going to be a lesson. It's more about you guys just diving into things that maybe you've put on the back burner or something like that, or you've been intrigued by, or maybe it's a material you bought that you've never had a chance to use. Pardon me. So whatever it is, Trusting Thursday is tomorrow, and yeah, come prepared with all kinds of stuff just so you can just have fun. And then Friday, of course, is our workshop. What is our workshop? It's Let Loose. Yes, thanks, Amelia. Amelia gave me the idea that we've had enough tightness and things going on, so little tight technique art. So now we're going to go and let loose. We're going to go bigger, even if you're just making backgrounds that you end up ripping up into other paper. You can just do it on paper, you can do it on canvas, you can do it on a substrate if you're going to turn it into a painting. Sky's the limit. Do whatever you want. It's going to be super fun. Okay? See y'all tomorrow. Bye-bye.